Home!
Dorothy exclaimed, her voice trembling with relief.
Finally, after so long a journey. So many times I thought we'd never make it. So many things have happened.
Dorothy's voice carried over the gathering, each word an irritating thorn in Malvaris's ears.
It all started that morning in Kansas.
Dorothy said, her tone drenched in nostalgia.
There was a twister coming. Uncle Henry's knee always told us before the sky did. Hard to believe, but it also happened to be the anniversary of my Ma and Pa's passing. I didn't have time to dwell on that, though. There was a poor tramp living in the old McReady place. He'd have no way of knowing a cyclone was coming.
The Scarecrow asked, "Did you warn him in time?"
I did.
Dorothy replied with a faint smile.
But I almost didn't make it back myself. The moment I stepped through the door, the house began to spin. It spun and spun.
Malvaris sneered. Beside her, Verena shifted restlessly. "What now?" she muttered. "Twisters, tramps, and excuses," Malvaris hissed. "She's spinning a tale, and the Quadlings are lapping it up." Dorothy gestured broadly, mimicking a spinning house.
When it finally stopped, it came crashing down, right on the Wicked Witch of the East.
Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by cheers. Malvaris exhaled sharply. "Cheering our sister's death." "Fools," Verena sneered. "Shall we remind them later?" "Perhaps," Malvaris replied, though her focus stayed on Dorothy.
The Wicked Witch of the West was cruel. But she told me something strange before she tried to take the silver shoes.
Her tone dropped, heavy with gravity.
She told me how she lost her eye.
"Impossible," Malvaris froze. Out of the corner of her eye, she glanced at Verena, who remained fixated on the square. No reaction to what Dorothy had just said. Thank the burning stars her hearing is not as sharp as my own, Malvaris thought. Dorothy leaned forward and said,
She said there was a boy, someone she thought cared for her. But it was a trick. He gave her a poisoned muffin. And when she fell ill, Malvaris, her own sister, came in and ripped her eye right out of her head.
Malvaris's breath quickened. The enchanted eye, the very eye she had torn from Zoris's head, pressed against her chest like a smouldering weight. Zoris had told this girl her darkest shame. Betrayed by her own sister over a boy. Why would she reveal that? Dorothy's brow furrowed.
It was so awful, even for her,
she murmured.
For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then she tried to trick me, tried to pull the shoes right off my feet.
Her expression hardened.
I was so scared. I grabbed a bucket of water and threw it on her, and she melted.
The crowd gasped. Glinda pressed a hand to her chest, her face etched with sorrow. The Scarecrow leaned forward, his button eyes wide. The Tin Man gripped his axe, and the lion's tail coiled nervously at his side. Verena asked, what was said? Why'd they react that way? How she murdered Zoris, Malvaris replied, her tone flat. She shifted her weight slightly, concealing the sharp ache gnawing at her insides. Verena said, The crowd cheers for it. Perhaps we should give them something to scream about. Aye, Malvaris murmured, her gaze fixed on Dorothy Gale. How had this girl gotten Zoris the Wicked Witch of the West to open up to her? To tell her a secret Malvaris had assumed her sister would take to the grave. The most powerful, wicked witch in all of Oz, swooning over a boy. Trusting a boy only to be betrayed. A secret her sister would kill legions to protect, but this young girl had gotten it out of her somehow. Malvaris shook her head. She had dismissed the girl as harmless, but now... It was clear Dorothy Gale was not to be underestimated.
Farah pressed herself flat against the ground, wriggling through the narrow passage she and Talus had painstakingly cleared for the gentle capybaras to wander freely into the village. They'd spent days carving the path through the thorny barricade, and even longer teaching the creatures how to find and use it. Now that kind effort was her only hope of reaching help. Thorns tore at her back and sides, their jagged edges slicing into her skin as she inched forward, every movement a new flare of pain. She bit her lip hard to stifle any sound, her body trembling with the effort to keep going. Talas, the image of him falling, blood pouring from his throat, flashed in her mind. Her chest tightened, a sob rising before she crushed it down. She couldn't think of him, or her uncle, or her father. Not now. Her breath hitched as fractured memories of the attack on the witches surged back. The pain had blurred everything, her vision swimming with tears and agony. All she'd seen was something shooting out of the bushes, slamming into the witches. A boar, perhaps? She'd been too blinded to tell in the moment. It had yelled at her to run. No, not a boar then, a quadling. It was... Her mind recoiled from the truth. Better not think of it now, or she would break down and be useless. She had to get to Glinda. The good witch would fix those evil ones.
Malvaris watched from the shadows, her focus razor-sharp on the scene unfolding in the square. Dorothy's voice softened as her tale wound to its close, her words tinged with melancholy.
And now,
she said, glancing at her companions,
it's time for me to go home. I'll miss you all more than words can say.
The Scarecrow patted her hand with his stitched fingers, the Tin Man's axe clinked softly as he nodded, and the lion sniffled, swiping at his face with a massive paw. Glinda stepped forward, her serene presence commanding quiet. "The journey has been long, and the bond you share will not fade with distance," she said gently. Her voice carried over the square, clear and soothing, as the villagers watched with rapt attention. With a fluid motion, she raised her wand, its crystalline tip glowing with a soft golden light. The air shimmered as she began weaving the spell, her movements deliberate and graceful, her voice murmuring words of power that flowed like a quiet river into the surrounding air. The enchanted eye warmed against Malvaris's chest, its pulse sharpening her focus. She caught every word Glinda uttered, her heightened hearing making the incantation as vivid as the motion of Glinda's wand. The eye brought the distant square into crystal clarity, recording each delicate weave of the spellwork. Every thread of light, every shimmering ripple of the portal's formation etched itself into the eye's memory. This would later guide Malvaris in opening her own portal. A portal of wavering light shimmered into existence before Glinda, its edges rippling like fragile glass, catching the sun. From her perch, Malvaris watched intently, the enchanted eye pressing hot against her chest as it captured the intricate weaving of the spell. Glinda lowered her wand, her voice carrying gently over the square. "All you need do is step through," she told Dorothy, "and you will be home." The brat's face crumpled as she turned to her companions, clinging to each in turn. The Scarecrow wrapped her in a straw-filled embrace, his trembling arms full of grief. The Tin Woodman placed a stiff hand over his hollow chest, his sorrow evident even in his creaking joints. The lion's soft roar carried heartbreak to every corner of the square, the quadlings looking on with misty-eyed admiration. Dorothy stood at the edge of the light, her figure taut and outlined sharply against its glow. Her movements slowed, her posture rigid, as though caught in an invisible battle. Then, with a measured step, she entered. The light surged in an instant, flaring with an intense glow that seemed to swallow everything around it. When it dimmed, only emptiness remained where she had been. The girl vanished without a trace. Verena said, "When we find her, we bind her and her ken, then make her watch as we break them down one by one. Her suffering and theirs will last days." Malvaris nodded, then said, "Come. Let's make sure her happy reunion is short-lived." A red-haired girl burst into the square below, her frantic cries slicing through the air. Her clothes were torn in several places, the fabric clinging to patches of dried blood at the rips. Small cuts marked her face and arms. Verena sucked in a sharp breath, her voice low and furious. "She went through the wall of thorns after all." Her hand clenched tightly on her wand. "We should have finished her." The girl pointed toward the forest, her words tumbling out in a wail. "Witches!" she screamed. "They killed Greer! They killed Talas! They killed my—" The girl collapsed to her knees, sobbing, unable to finish. Verena rounded on Malvaris. Who's the fool? Who? Your laziness has cost us. Glinda will come for us now. We can't outrun her magic.